でも、高明くんの病気は治療に時間のかかる病気で。
Oh great, on top of being a monster, now he has either the Byogans or the Bugster virus. I'm gonna assume the latter. This one opened with some nice shots of nature as a big cyber lion thing ran by. Oh yeah, you were a thing, weren't you? Yeah, for those who don't remember, which I wouldn't blame you, this is Takaaki from episode 12, a chronically hospitalized kid who was childhood friends with Miyako and could somehow blow bubbles into bubbles, which yeah, I still call BS on that. It's almost as nonsensical as trying to make candy out of it. But yeah, along with Sedusa, he was easily one of the most tragic and yet interesting members of the Girlz' Rogues Gallery, and it's taken up until near the end of the series to get any follow-up since his debut episode.
That makes sense to me.
It's a real pity because, as we'll get into later, this could have easily been a great long-running story arc for the series, but due to some sort of behind-the-scenes issues, we never really got it. Oh well. Anyway, the girls decide to go to the park to satiate Momoko's never-ending sweet tooth.
こないだ甘いもの食べて散々な目にあったばっかだろ。太るぞ。
Well, to be fair, Kaoru's donuts have been known to save the universe a few times. Though I'm not even sure if that goofball would be willing to make a donut bigger than the person he's selling it to. Seriously, anime protagonist stats cannot be sustainable. Still, at least this did have a narrative purpose, as it restarted this heavily delayed storyline. It also started a bit of a running gag in this episode, where Momoko would keep referring to Takaaki with escalating bubble monikers from Knight to Emperor, but I'll just stick with Bubble Beast like we did in the original review. Anyway, after Miyako wrote down the date of when a lot of the show's scripts were likely written, Utonium contacted her.
高明くんのことだが、ようやく情報がつかめた。
本当ですか?
Yeah, and it only took you like, what, about 40 episodes? Seriously, lady, with how long this kid's been gone, you could probably have declared him legally dead. But yeah, they learned that Takaaki had been admitted to the hospital 7 years prior with a heart disease, so just shortly after his last meeting with Miyako. And while they never really specified what exactly he had and why he needed to be hospitalized for so long, I'd imagine it was mostly just to prep him for a full-on surgery that he'd get when he was older and conditioned for it. And yet, like any major surgery, the hospital was required to get his written consent to proceed, which he refused to do every time out of fear. Not helping matters was the fact that his emotional support group that he had built up with the other hospitalized kids had gradually faded away as each of them were released ahead of him. I know I keep saying this, but damn, sometimes the show just gets a little too real, especially after recent years. Meanwhile, said Whoopie Beast had made contact with some campers that led to predictable results. This ended up triggering the aforementioned memories from the hospital, as well as his meeting with the blue magical girl. Thus, he went to that same park, and the girls were deployed to deal with him. And Miyako, of course, proved to be best girl, as not only did she comfort him by saying that they were the same, having been empowered by opposite colored lights, but also revealed her secret identity to him. Yeah, it's a bit of a played out cliche, especially for these tales where a villain is face turning, but if it's executed well, then it's fine in my opinion. Also, it is worth mentioning now that the animation, at least for the first half of this episode, hasn't been the greatest, like this overhead shot of the Bubble Beast, which, yeah, does take away from the big emotional moment of Takaaki's humanity slowly coming back to him. Hell, I think a lot of it has just been recycled from the 12th episode. That said, I do think it's all going to be worth it once we get into the second half of this episode. The two old friends sat down to have a little talk and went through some of the standard talking points.
タカちゃんだって変わらないですよ。
Miyako confirmed to be a furry. But yeah, from there, the conversation did almost become too real for likely anyone who's been chronically hospitalized, including the doctors giving him comforting words, and yet also dubious promises of him ever getting better. Thus, it was understandable they find his current form initially preferable to staying in the hospital or risking a life or death surgery. Yet, because of his monstrous appearance, he instead found himself ostracized by the rest of the world, making it not that much different from being stuck to a hospital bed for years. Again, it's just really a pity that this didn't end up becoming a longer running story arc for the series, because as is, it's not bad or anything, but still, it is also a bit of a cliche tale. I mean, someone being forced to take on a more monstrous appearance in order to gain back some form of freedom that was taken from them is often seen in many villain origin stories. And yet, it's only used as much as it is because it is a good storytelling engine. I mean, it's essentially the tragic Frankenstein's monster tale with the added layer that one time they were a normal person until extraneous circumstances changed that, and it only got worse from there. As a result, the heroes of the story often have a duty to do what they can for that lost soul, whilst fulfilling their normal superhero obligations. In this case, it was even more complicated for Miyako, as not only did she know her adversary, but they had also made a pinky promise. And considering he couldn't exactly blow bubbles in his current state, she did believe that he would return to normal, but the influence of the black light was a little too strong. And this is why I was talking about the animators saving up their energy and budget, as after a dramatic lightning flash, this episode got easily some of the show's most unique and dynamic lighting. Now obviously, I have nothing against this show's usual bright and colorful animation that both references the OG, and yet also gives it its own unique look, though in turn, when they do something different like this and the previous 12th episode, it stands out even more and gives a sense that the situation is far more dire, and in Miyako's case, personal. And on top of that, just some plain good animation, and yeah, this episode might have come a little late, but at least they're trying to make up for it. Eventually, it came down to Miyako as her old friend turned into a manticore, and yeah, did I mention the animation here is really good? But yeah, again, she used her strongest weapon by assuring others that they were stronger than they thought they were, and thus did need the influence of a crab devil to overcome their ailments. And with that, Miyako debuted a convenient one-time finisher which purified Takaki without the use of the prof's gun. Granted, they did kind of justify it by stating they could only really work on Takaki due to his connection to bubbles, with Miyako even performing his impossible bubble freedom trick, which at least makes more sense with her magical bubbles here. With that, the episode ended on a really damn sweet note, with Miyako visiting Takaki, and of course, that ending theme working best with this episode, as the lyrics about opening up to others, in spite of living a life filled with tears, rung even harder. While I do think a lot of stories, especially the ones that come out of the doors of toy animation, could use a little more build-up, this was at least a satisfying conclusion to something that came from near the beginning of the series. I think it helps that I'm a bit of a fan of tragic villain stories when they're done right, and especially when they highlight a main character's greatest qualities. And thankfully, they did just that with Miyako with some great animation, as well as, yeah, just some sweet as all hell moments. I think I mentioned this before, but my personal favorite PPG has always been Bubbles, be it the OG, this, or hell, even the 2016 remake. To me, in spite of her cute appearance, she's actually the most assertive member of her team, often trying to find the best solution to their problems, which doesn't always have to involve fisticuffs. Miyako is a perfect representation of this, as while it's difficult to measure others who you've never met, she always tries to bring the best out of those close to her. Thus, in spite of not having met for a while, she did believe there was more to Takaki than the cyborg lion she faced. Now granted, it would have been nice if they had just let the story play out over a few episodes, like maybe have Miyako agonize over the thought that she'd have to fight her first love, and yet try to find a better solution, which would end up being recreating his bubble blowing technique. Alas, we didn't get that, for the most part, but what we did get was emotionally satisfying thanks to a great presentation. The progressively more dramatic lighting really helped to emphasize the anxiety that she likely felt as the time neared for her to face her old friend, and when that time did eventually come, we got one of the most emotionally driven, small-scale fights of the series. And even with the limited time they were afforded, they at least managed to strike all of the right emotional cues to build sympathy for Takaki. It got to the point that even Momoko and Kaoru got invested, even though they didn't get a lot of focus, and the former was reduced down to a bit of a running gag, but whatever, they did their job of emphasizing this Beauty and the Beast telling really well. And overall, while it could have been more, I'm also not dissatisfied with the conclusion to this story. Just like an actual bubble, Miyako will always try to fly as high as she can before it's all over, and she certainly managed to do that as this show begins to wrap up. Work is progressing steadily for the series review of the OG Precure series, in spite of us also need to do work for that new series coming. Still, past or future, we'll try to provide as much content as we can for this channel. The new year is nigh, as is a lot of plans we have for then. Look forward to all of that, and until then though, farewell for now my friends, and
pelvic thrust!
you know you say that, and yet you're not actually pulling your pelvis out. Don't actually do it!